Right, I think we can get started. Thank you all very much for coming along. I really appreciate you taking the time out to come to this session. And I'm also aware that I'm the only thing separating you from lunch. So I'll try to keep it to time. We started a couple of minutes late. I'll try and finish on at 20 past 12. My name is Will Thompson. Thank you very much for coming along. This session has been titled Creating Impactful Reports with Power BI Desktop. I think perhaps a better title would actually be 15 Weird Tricks that will make your reports awesome. What this is going to be is try to take the collected wisdom of the Power BI product team, myself having spent many years building reports and visualizations with the Microsoft Power BI tools, and various tips and tricks that I've picked up from folks like you. We've got a fantastic community out there who are building really interesting solutions using Power BI and using them in really creative ways. You'll also notice I don't have any slides. This is going to be totally demos. Yes! I spent 5 years before I joined the product team in sales, and the one thing that I learned from that was people hate slide presentations. So demos are the way forward. You can find me on Twitter. If you've got any questions or anything afterwards, that's a great place to get in touch. And obviously, how many of you have gone to community.powerbi.com? Excellent. How many of you visited the community lounge that we've got up around the corner? That's not enough of you. I want everybody to go there after this session. Get some lunch first, obviously. But once you've done that, go up to the community lounge, sign up there. It's a great place to share ideas, get more of these tips and tricks, and hang out, network with other folks like yourselves. So just a quick introduction to me. I spent, like I said, 5 years in our sales org over in the UK. That's why my accent sounds funny compared to other folks around here. And then I joined the product team about 3 years ago after having spent so much time with people like yourselves who were saying, why doesn't Power View do this? Why doesn't Power Pivot do that? I thought, I should go and make it do those things. So I spent 3 years, and fortunately, we actually built some of those features. I don't know if you've noticed, but the Power BI team have been quite busy. We've done a huge amount in the last couple of years, and that's kind of one of the reasons why these tips and tricks have become so relevant for people. That there's a lot of capability in the product that people can take advantage of now, and that's why I want to share that with you. So I'm going to start off. How many of you have used the Power BI desktop before? Excellent. That's really, really good. So I'm going to do a very, very quick introduction just for anybody who's not 100% familiar with it. I'll do a quick tour around how the desktop works from a reporting point of view, and then dive into some of the newer features that maybe I haven't come up with, and some of those tips and tricks. How does that sound? Good? Great. Stick your hand up if you've got questions as we go along. It's a fairly short session, so I might say we'll cover them at the end, or come and speak to me afterwards. Or come and find me in the community lounge. But yeah, throw your hand up if you've got questions. So, Power BI Desktop. When you start, I'm going to assume that you've gone and got some data. There's a Get Data button here at the top. Hopefully Zoom it works for me. Yeah, that's OK. There's a Get Data button up at the top, and that allows you to go and connect to your SQL databases or your Excel spreadsheets or wherever you're getting your data. And once you've pulled some data in, you'll find on the right-hand side, you'll see a set of tables or fields that you've pulled in. In the middle, you've got a nice blank canvas. And this is the place where you can start building visualizations, doing your analysis. And you'll have this visualizations pane, which gives you access to the gallery of visuals that we provide out of the box. It provides you a way to go and get custom visuals, which I'll talk about a bit more later on. And then down here is how you can control the look and feel of the visuals that are on your page. And building things is really simple. You just find the fields that you're interested in, drag them over to the canvas, and we'll start creating stuff for you. So if you pick a measure, something like sales amount, we'll give you a chart. And then I can say, OK, I want to slice this by our style of car. And great. Now I've got a little visualization showing that we've been selling lots of diesel cars and lots of sports cars and fewer of the others. Really simple. Let's try some other ones. So let's take our sales amount again, and this time we'll look at it over time. And let's turn that into a line chart. So converting between different visualizations, you just select the one that you want from this visualizations pane. And then finally, let's add something new. Let's use this cards, and we can add our style of car, the model, maybe the make, and let's add sales and margin as well. Here we go, here's my little report. How many clicks was that? Maybe 10, 12 clicks. And I've got a really simple visualization that's showing me some of the details about the cars we've sold, what types of cars it was, and how that trended over time. And the great thing about these visuals is that they're all instantly interactive. I don't have to do anything else. I can just start clicking on these things, and assuming the data's all come from the same place, things get cross-filtered and highlighted. So I can see, okay, our diesels, we had this big spike back in kind of 2008. It flattened off, and then it's picked up again in the last couple of years. Compare that to our sports cars, and you can see the trend's very, very different. The spike here was in 2009. But given that was, like I said, 12, maybe 15 clicks, really, really easy to create these very, very quick reports. The other thing that I can do here is start formatting and changing the way that this report looks. So things like adding titles is really easy. Let's give some space. I can just choose to insert a text box. Oops. I have to type, unfortunately, which is always difficult on a stage. This is my car sales report. And do whatever you need to make it a little bit bigger and make it bold or whatever you need. So I can start adding text. I can add images to this as well. I can do all sorts of different things, even drawing shapes or lines, or if I wanted to put an arrow in to highlight a particular time period. This is the interesting one. Diesels. Those are the most interesting cars, obviously. So I've got a bunch of controls that I can just start to embellish and add things onto my reports. And of course, I can go and start changing the format of these charts and visuals as well. So this visualizations pane also contains, under this formatting tab, all of the different options that you can find here to control whether or not we're showing the axes, what those axes look like, do we have a title for it, things like the color for the data. If I wanted to change and use red for all of these bars or color particular bars in a different color, I can set all of those sort of things here. That's what the Power BI team have really been sort of focused on over the last couple of years, is giving you more and more of those formatting options to build really, really beautiful reports. And there's more coming. I think in the keynote yesterday, Amir was showing how we're going to enable conditional formatting on tables. That's something that's been a really common request from users like you guys, and something we've been working hard on. So building these reports is really great. And those simple interactions, that cross-highlighting and filtering, I think is one of the real highlights of Power BI reports, and one of the ways that you can have the most impact with these reports. It makes it a really easy way to start telling a story with those reports and highlighting some of the key insights that you find in your data. But there's a few things that are worth noting around those interactions. So the default is that when I select one of these options, it will cross-highlight the other visuals. So things like bar charts, where I can partially highlight a certain set, or these tree maps, the same thing's happening. You can see I selected this Wiltshire area. Wiltshire is one of the counties in the UK. And I can see, that contributed about 40% of our overall diesel sales. And I get the same sort of partial highlighting in this tree map. But you'll notice the line chart had something different happen. It's actually filtered that line chart. That's the default behavior, because how do you partially highlight a line chart? I don't know what that would look like. But you can control that. A few people have said, well, actually, I want it to filter everything. I just want to use this as a filter. And you'll find up on the Visual Tools Formatting tab here a few different features. One of them is this Edit Interactions option. This allows you to change how visuals interact with each other when you start selecting those data points. So I turn that on, I can see, by default, I'm doing this highlighting on those charts, and for this line chart, it's defaulted to filter. And I can change it, so let's make these filter as well, and maybe I don't want it to do anything to my line chart, so I can turn that interaction off. And now, when I click in these, you'll see it's filtering these charts at the top. The values are all roughly the same, so maybe it's a little subtle. And there's no interaction at all going on with this line chart at the bottom. So I've seen people use that in a whole bunch of different ways. Things like I've got a couple of charts at the top of my page, which are my kind of all-up trends or my total KPIs. And I don't want to have those affected when I start analyzing and slicing and dicing with the other visuals on my page. Or maybe I've got two sets of visuals, one which is about the current period and one which is about my history. And I don't want them to interact with each other because otherwise, I select the current period and suddenly my history is only showing the current period. So again, you can turn off those interactions between them. Some really, really simple things that are relatively new and maybe people haven't spotted before. Another really useful trick or tip or whatever you want to call this, some of them are going to get into kind of workarounds and hacks a little bit later on. This is just using the features, is the ability to change the sorting on a particular field. This is something that I see surprisingly often where people will build reports using the day of the week. And you can see our weeks our days are ordered that very logical way of alphabetically. Friday was obviously coming at the front of the week, and then Monday, Saturday, Sunday. Okay, so it's easy to sort this out. Power BI doesn't know that your day of week field actually means something. It's just you've got this random field in your data set. But if you want to change it, over on the right-hand side, select the field that you've got. Just click on it, and you'll see it gets this yellow border around it. And then up on our modeling tab, there is this sort by column option. And that allows you to say, don't use the default sorting. Here's another column that you should refer to that gives us the sort order. So in this case, it's the number for the day of the week. And now it all comes out in the right order. And for some reason, in this company, our weekends appear to be Monday and Tuesday. I don't know, fine, whatever. But you can use that in loads of different ways as well. For something here like a sales pipeline, the default, again, this is going to be sorted alphabetically. But for most pipelines, you start off by having some leads, and then you go and talk to them and qualify that, and maybe you have some kind of solution that gets created, and eventually you close the sale. So again, come over, find the field that I'm interested in, choose that sort by column, and pick the ordering, and now my pipeline gets rearranged and looks like it's in the right order. So that's kind of the common way of using this. Now, I've seen some other interesting ways, like if you want to have things appearing in your legend in a very specific order, that's another way of kind of using that, because this will be affected anyway, or this will affect any part of the visual. So not just the order that the categories appear in a chart, but it will appear in the legend. The same thing on your filters. So for example, if you're using either filters at a visual level or at a page level, this will change the order in which they appear here as well. So if there are particular fields that people filter on more often, stick them at the top of the list. And then people can search through the others if they need those other values. So let's get on to some more. This was something that got asked, I guess, for the last 6 years, maybe 4 years, however long it's been that we started building Power View. How many of you use Power View? It's kind of the precursor to this Power BI reporting tool. One of the most common things that people ask, well, I just need to be able to change the color. I've got this green chart here. I want it to be blue because that's our corporate branding. I showed you before how, over on the Formatting tab, there are a set of options here for controlling either the default color or setting the color for each individual value separately. But you can also change the color dynamically based on a value in your data. So if you wanted to say, rather than showing me just one color for each, I want to take our, in this case, so I should explain where this data comes from before I start talking about kills and deaths, and it's all very morbid. Have any of you heard of the game Destiny? I see one hand. I'm disappointed. Oh, okay, a few more. Okay, right. So have you heard of Halo? That's a much bigger franchise. Okay, a lot more people have heard of that. So the guys who made Halo left Microsoft and created this game called Destiny. It's one of those first-person shooters, and you run around and kill your friends. It's great. Good, clean fun, right? But the best thing is that all of the data that you generate when you're playing the game is available through an API. So I can go and call this API and say, go and get me my statistics for the last game that I was playing, and for, in fact, my entire history of games. And then I can see, how many minutes I've been playing, how many people I've killed, how often I've died, what weapons I've been using, what maps I've been playing on, all of that great stuff. And it makes for a great demo. Anyway, so turns out there's a bunch of designers in our team who are really into the game. I play it a little bit. And actually, since I started talking about this in the community, this chap, Miguel, he's not here, is he? No, OK. He said, hey, I play it as well. So I found his gamer tag, the thing that you go by online, and I can get his data as well. Anyway, so back to the point about this formatting, right? So I'm looking at the total number of, the ratio of how many people you killed versus how many times you died. Nick, one of our designers, is obviously doing really well. But if I wanted to color this based on something different, like the absolute number of kills that we've got, I can drag this into this color saturation field area. And now you can see the intensity of the color is driven by this other value. So although Nick's doing a very good job, on average, his kills versus his deaths, actually Ron's getting the highest number of kills overall. I hope that's appearing well on the screen. And I'm languishing back at the bottom somewhere. I'm not very good. So that's great for some of these kind of just a range of colors. What I could also do, though, let's go and use the same value as I'm showing for the height, just as a better indication. So the higher bars will be more intense. What I could also do is go and say, rather than setting those colors manually, I want to use a gradient, and I want to control the colors and the banding, if you will, for those colors. So I'm going to turn on this kind of diverging scale. The reason I want to do that is that it lets me kind of go from a red to a green. So red is bad, green is good. And yes, you can see I'm very bad. But what this also lets me do now is say, what values should I use to determine whether it's red or green? By default, it just picks what's the highest value in my data set and what's the lowest value in my data set. And let's do a smooth gradient between all of those. But I can go and override it. So if you've got a KD ratio of 1, it means you've killed the same number of people as the number of times you've died. So let's use that as our baseline. So now anybody who's had a ratio higher than 1 will be green. Anyone less than 1 will be red. So what I'll do is I'll put the same values in each of these buckets. And there's conditional formatting, right? Say yes, Will. Good, thank you. So that's it, right? Really simple way. It's a little bit of a kind of workaround. We could go and make that UX easier and make that better. Maybe we'll do that in the future. Keep voting for it on our ideas forum. But you can go and use this today. Anytime you want to kind of highlight values that are in a particular range or spot outliers, using this color gradient's a really great way of doing that. So while I mentioned the suggestions, how many of you have found our ideas forum, our suggestions forum? Good kind of couple of people there. OK, in which case, I will just show you. Ideas.powerbi.com is the URL. This is a really, really great website. If you've got any suggestions or ideas or new features that you want to see us build, go onto this site. You can put in your idea here. It'll search through any existing ones, so you can kind of go and upvote other people's ideas. And you can see what's at the top of the list. So common things, PowerPoint integration, 3,700 votes. Power BI reports and on-premises hosting. Anybody want to do on-prem Power BI and not use the cloud? OK, yeah, we know. We're working on it. PowerPoint's a really interesting one. I'm going to throw out some other random tips and tricks as we go. How many of you have heard of a company called DevScope? They produced a PowerPoint add-in. Good. I'm seeing a few people who have already seen this. They produced a PowerPoint add-in that lets you drop a Power BI tile that's being hosted in one of your dashboards right into a PowerPoint presentation. And it's a live tile. It'll automatically refresh. You can set it to update every 30 seconds or something as you're doing the presentation. Really, really nice way of just embedding that content right into your PowerPoint presentations. So the company is DevScope. I'm not sure they know that I'm plugging their products, but I'm sure they'd appreciate it if they did. Give it a go. OK, so there's another free tip. I've lost count of how many we're up to already. I think 15 was a bit of a conservative estimate. We'll see. OK. So I'm getting into slightly more obscure tips and workarounds and other ways of doing things. One of them that we hear pretty regularly is how do I see when my data was last refreshed? So when I'm building my report and I send it out to other folks in my organization or I publish it to the service and share it, I want to know when when that data is relevant of. What was it? How fresh is that data? And one of the things that you can do is actually drop a last refresh date right onto your report canvas. There's a couple of ways of getting the date. My favorite here is to use a Power Query or the query editor within the Power BI desktop function. Just create a new query and use this datetime.localNow setting. I see a lot of people taking photos. Feel free. I am going to make this workbook available for everybody. I'll tweet it probably, and maybe we'll try and publish it through the Power BI blog. It's going to take me a couple of weeks. I'm waiting for another feature that I'm hoping will arrive very soon that will make it even easier. But if not, I'll try and strip out the other bits and get it published.
So just follow you?
You can follow me on Twitter. I will definitely tweet about it when it's ready. Or if you don't go and read the Power BI blog regularly, go and subscribe to that RSS feed as well. Anyway, excuse me, for this refresh date, you can use this local now time just to say, when I hit refresh, it'll just save the local time on your machine. If you're connecting to a SQL database, sure, you could go and write part of your SQL query to go and get the time off the server, or you could have it on your tables there, whatever it might be. But it means that, let me open up my, open up the query editor and I'll show you. Here's my last refresh date. So you can see I last refreshed this back on the 23rd. Oh, that's today. That's this morning. And it's just returning that formula. But then what I'm doing, I've got that field in my data model here, last refresh. But I've also written a DAX measure on top of that adds this last refreshed on kind of title. How many of you were in Rob Colley's session just a minute ago before here? A few of you, OK. So one of the things that he mentioned was about DAX measures that can return text. This is actually a really, really useful feature. I use that all the time in my Power BI reports, as well as in Excel and Power Pivot, which is where Rob was showing it. So I've created this DAX formula that shows, this is the name of the formula. So it's just appending a text string and then going and getting the first date out of that date table. Now that date column it's only got one value in it, but I need to wrap it in this first date aggregate. All of the measures need to have an aggregate. And it creates this dynamic text string. So I can use that in one of these card visuals, which is this little 1, 2, 3 visual. And then I can do things like turning off the label and maybe making the text a little bigger or smaller, depending on your report. And that becomes a really, really helpful sort of little title that you can just drop onto a report. And of course, every time you hit refresh, the date's going to get updated, and this dynamic title is going to get updated to reflect it. Useful? I'm seeing a few nods, which is good. Great. So let's put all this together. I'm going to go back to my Destiny data, because it's something I like. Here's a kind of a report I use as a bit of a showcase for a bunch of different visual tips and techniques. So the first thing that's probably going to jump out is that behind here I've got an image that's being used as a background of this report. And it's a nice way just to make things pop. You can set the transparency of these background visuals as well. So if you don't have anything selected, when you come to the formatting tab, you'll see these page settings. I've picked up a JPEG that I just found off the internet. And like I said, I can change the transparency of this. So bump the transparency up and it kind of fades it out. And it just means that it doesn't get in the way of the charts and graphs that you've got in front of it. So it's not going to obscure any of the data. I'm using that gradient coloring. I've also turned on reference lines here. So this was a relatively recent feature in the Power BI desktop that I can add a reference line. And I can go and set what value do I want to draw that line in. And I've got various settings for the look and feel of it. One of the things that we've always wanted to do in the future is have this kind of dynamic. I want to be able to type, give me the average in here. And that's certainly something that's kind of in the plan. There was a question down there.
I take that the idea of having dynamic reference lines is not available today, but coming.
That idea of having dynamic reference lines, it's not available today, but it's on our backlog. We've got a bunch of things that we could be doing, and it's a case of prioritization. So get on the ideas forum, upvote it if you want kind of dynamic properties in this pane.
Would a workaround be using something like a single value table, like you did with
Sure.
put a value in that, and
So,
put that on there?
yeah, so the question is, would a workaround being using like a single value table or another measure and dropping that on there? So I can't type a measure name into this value box, but one of the things that I have seen people do for reference lines, another way of doing this is turning this into a combo chart. So one of those charts where you can use bars and lines together. And then rather than having, let's put our kills back on there, sort it in the other way as well. Now what I could do, I could drop into this line values field, I could drop any measure, right? So I can go and grab another measure out of here. I think I've got one that just returns 1. And I can draw that line. So I could use that to the measure could be dynamically evaluating, okay, what's the reference line, if you will, for each of the players in this case. So yeah, there's a few ways that I could work around that. But at the moment, we want to build those kind of dynamic properties for a whole bunch of other reasons, and I'm sure we'll get there eventually. The ability to use measures to drive a bunch of different things in reports is something that we've sort of started to make steps towards, and we're going to do more work in the future. So I would really strongly advise you, if you've not got your head around writing DAX measures, go and do that. The power that the DAX gives you in being able to write these measures really makes a big difference to the sort of reports that you could be producing. So some of the other things that I did here, particularly given that I had this sort of picture background, was making some of these titles a different color just so that they pop a little bit more. Another really common thing that I see quite common in reports is to change the background color of the title for your report, just to kind of outline the top of a particular chart. And again, I think that helps. If you do that if you've got lots of charts on a page, it kind of helps tie everything together. Let me just add this one as well. And of course, the other thing that's really important here then is making sure everything's lined up. So, when I'm just trying to manually position these and make sure that my charts are, nice and neat, it's really tricky. Something that got added recently is that I can control select and choose multiple of these. And then on this formatting tab, I've got a bunch of alignment options now. So I can change the Z order. Oh, okay, a round of applause for that. Hey, great. So I can align those up to the top, and it'll make everything line up. You can actually go in and you'll find under the formatting there's a general tab, and you can go and manually set the X and the Y position and the height and the width. So you can make everything exactly the same size and line everything neatly up on your page. And that's another really useful thing, particularly as you start adding more visuals and you start overlaying things as well. It's another tip I'll show you a little bit later on. There are some really neat ways of doing that. I wanted to show you this as another example. This is another dynamic text measure. In this case, it's actually being used to give some instructions. So I've got 2 charts on this page. One is showing the number of kills by weapon, and one of this is the number of kills by each player. And this is just giving people some instructions. Click on the player or weapon to find out who was most successful or which weapon was most successful. So now when I select a player, so if I want to focus on Ron, it shows me the cross-highlighting, but it also changes that measure dynamically and says, Ron's favorite weapon, he does really well with the super, this is how many kills he's had. Compare that to Ewan, his favorite's this pulse rifle. And it works the other way as well, that if I want to select one of the weapons, let's focus on the machine guns. Machine guns are used most effectively by Nick. So it's a dynamic bit of text that's telling you what to do, but also giving you the insight without having to go and figure out, which of these bars on the right-hand side are actually the highest, and trying to figure out the numbers. So how did I build this? Well, if I open up my field pane, here's my measure. It's a bit of a monster formula. But basically what it's saying is, just zoom in on here, we're using this has one value. This is a really useful function in DAX that says, if this field, this name field, has been filtered to just a single value, so just a single player, either through a filter or through highlighting by clicking on something, then do something. If not, do something else. So we've got, you'll notice that happens a couple of different times. So sometimes I'm checking for the name, sometimes I'm checking for the weapon. And then I'm dynamically constructing a the name field plus this little bit of text in the middle with their favorite weapon. And then this crazy lookup value business goes and says, OK, so for the player who was selected, what was their kills with the weapon that was their favorite? Slightly complicated, but you get the idea, right? And eventually it falls out. The bottom of the if statement is just that instruction. If nothing's been selected and we're looking at all players and all weapons, then they'll tell the user, go and highlight the player or weapon. So I'm seeing a few blank faces. I'm seeing a few people who are going, oh, yeah, that's kind of interesting. Like I said, I'll share the workbook so you can go and deconstruct the formula. But it's a really, really interesting way of kind of dynamically constructing these things. I've seen people do this to create like little KPI indicators where they're just using up and down arrows. Like just go and get ASCII arrows and use that to drive things. That's a really simple formula, right? If it's if my measure is positive, then show an up arrow. If it's negative, then show a down arrow. Really, really simple. But a nice little way of just kind of bringing your users along, as they're exploring your data. I also took a look at this data, data on all the games we've played by time. And this is a really nice sort of way of visualizing it. You'll also see, do any of you use GitHub? A couple of people? A couple of developers in the room, great. So GitHub was one of the content providers that you can connect to through the Power BI service. So if you log into the Power BI service website, there's an out-of-the-box content pack that allows you to go to GitHub, and it lets you see who's checked in what code, how often people have been taking things off of that repository, and what times of day it is as well. And this is where we used one of these very similar visuals. I'm looking at the hour of the day along the x-axis, and the day of the week along the y-axis. So I can see, most people are playing kind of in the evenings, as you'd expect. There's a few folks who are playing at 6 o'clock in the morning, a few games played at 3 a.m. It's a pretty lengthy session. And it also means that you can see kind of when were you most successful. So Nick actually does really, really well at 3 o'clock in the morning. 215 of his kills came from really late night sessions. But when he plays in the evening, there's smaller bubbles around here. The pink ones are Nick, so there are much smaller bubbles around there. I don't even know where mine is. I don't think I'm even showing up on here. That's how little I've been playing it. But I've done the same thing with kind of these little KPI cards to just call out those numbers so that when I'm focusing on a particular game or a particular session, I can just call out those numbers really simply as well.
So those are actually separate piles of data from the bubble chart.
Mm-hmm. So these are separate tiles of data from the bubble chart. And it's just using, let me just zoom in on this. It's using this, we call it a call-out visual or a card visual. And the card visual is really just for showing a single value. So all you can drop into it is there's just one field where you can just drop a measure. Now that measure could return text, hence how I'm doing the dynamic titles. But usually people use it just for dropping this top-level KPI. So the question is, I'm using these KPI tiles at the moment. Is there a good way to kind of have a benchmark or something to compare against? There's actually, if you get the latest version of the Power BI desktop, it's only got released last month. There's actually another visual that is really useful for this. So this little indicator, this little icon here is a KPI tile. And when I use this, let me give this a bit more space. I need to give it a value. I also need to give it a time period. So if I go and get our date, things are not looking so good. Things are kind of going the wrong way. You see you get this kind of trend indicator in the background and the latest value. So for the most recent game was 13 kills. Now, if I want to do a benchmark, I can create a calculation that gives me the previous the value from last week or from previous month or whatever it might be. And I can drop that into this target goals area. Now, I don't have a value, so I'm just going to pick something random. But now it compares what's that value to my target and sets it red or green. So let me try and pick something else. If I had score, when I'm under the target, it goes red. When I'm over it, it goes green. You can actually drop multiple values into here and have kind of a red, yellow, green banding. So that's a really useful visual for doing that. I'm actually building a scorecard, a dashboard that we use internally. So James, our CVP, who did the keynote yesterday, He's got a bunch of different teams underneath his organization. And we're all interested in how many people are using those different services. And we've just got a bunch of these KPI tiles that he uses every day. Go and have a look at this. Am I increasing versus last week or decreasing? What's the trend over the last 6 months? Really, really nice visual for that. Here's one other little tip. I built a page here looking about kind of team scores and how people are helping each other out. And this one in the bottom right-hand corner, I'm actually just going to create a separate page so we can see it in a bit more detail. You all know you can just do Control-C and Control-V to copy and paste visuals. That was a great feature when we added that. It sped things up so much. Anyway, what we're doing here, this is a scatter chart showing how many times people resurrected their teammates versus how many times they were resurrected. So if you resurrect resurrect people much more often than you are resurrected, then you're a healer. If it's the other way around, then you're a stealer. But to draw this kind of quadrant behind here, this was a really recent addition. My previous tips and tricks session would have said, create an image, drop it onto the page, and put your scatter chart on top of it, which is a real hack, a real workaround, and really painful, because as soon as you move one of them, the other one gets misaligned. Well, to save doing that, we made it a little easier. You can actually change, under the plot area, you can add an image, and it's just added within the axes of your scatter chart, and as you can see, when I resize it, it moves around with it. So if you want to create these quadrant charts, if you're doing like a urgent versus important kind of thing, or your project prioritization, it's a really nice way of showing that. And again, you can do things like managing the transparency just to make sure that the data is still really visible. Okay, got 10 minutes left. Yeah, I was open. Go for it at the back. Gentleman says he's challenged with controlling the bubble size on that grid. Yeah, we all are. Yeah. Unfortunately, you don't have any manual control over that at the moment. Again, it's been something that's been on the backlog for a little while, just a case of one of the things that we'll get to that we do want to do in the future.
All your bubbles were small.
Yep, all my bubbles were kind of small. I think what I've got on there, let's go back to this. Yeah, I don't have anything in the size field here. So it will use the default, which is kind of the smallest. Now, this may or may not work for your scenario, but this is another funny little kind of workaround that I found that works. It works great for demos. I mean, I've realized I'm presenting this on a giant screen behind me. It's probably really difficult to read because the text's quite small. And one of the things that you can do, if I make this even smaller, I can actually change the size of the page. So by default, you have this kind of 16:9 aspect ratio. I can make it 4:3. And I can go and change to be a completely custom size. So if I say, actually, I only want this to be 300 by 200 pixels, now it's much bigger. And actually, the size of these bubbles is relative to the size of the visual. So by making my page smaller, but it's being stretched to fill the screen, I'm getting more kind of pixels per bubble. If that makes sense. I'm seeing some nods, so I think it's getting through good. A little bit of a weird workaround, and it kind of only works if you've got one visual per page or just a smaller number of visuals per page. Just so you know, there's this page view option here that determines whether this is being stretched to fill the page or if it's being shown at actual size. So this is kind of the 200 by 300 pixels. Another thing that's worth thinking about, if you're creating these visuals to pin onto a dashboard, the tiles that you use on a Power BI dashboard are a specific aspect ratio. So you can have kind of these small ones or like taller ones or wide ones. I made a tweet a little while ago with the exact pixel sizes that you kind of want to make things to fit into those aspect ratios. There's another way of doing it, right? Create a page or create your visuals, set the size, the height and the width of these visuals to match that. And then when you pin them to the dashboard, you know kind of the layout and the aspect ratio that they're going to end up in. Okay, let's move on. Whilst I'm on the subject of those page sizes, I wanted to show this as well. How many of you used the Cortana integration with Power BI? Very few people, okay. This is actually really cool. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed because it doesn't always work. But I created this report. The reason that it's kind of long and thin like this is so that it fits into one of these Cortana answers. I've got this filter on here that says, I'm going to show this for one player at a time. And again, I'm using kind of the dynamic text thing to have this dynamic title for the player name. And as I select it, the charts update. But I can also ask for it through Cortana. So I can say player stats for Will. And I hold my breath and nothing happens. That's a shame. OK. My demo, OK. All of the other demos have worked. I'm hoping this will be the only bug. What would normally happen is this would turn into a little Power BI logo. Because basically, once you've connected your desktop, your Cortana, with Power BI, it sends all of the things up to Power BI and says, hey, do you have any good responses for me that I can give to this user? This would turn into a Power BI logo. You load this, and it loads it for you right here in Cortana. But to optimize it to load into that space, you need to be able to set the page size and control the layout and the formatting of this page. That's another reason to go and manually set that aspect ratio for the page. OK, going to move on. How many of you tried working with geographic data in Power BI? How many of you have successfully worked with geographic data in Power BI? Actually, it's not too bad. So one of the most common things that we hear is, I've got this data, I've got a set of cities, but when I put it on a map, they're not in the right place. Because either they're in the wrong country or whatever it might be. So I grew up in a town called Bath in the UK, which is here. It is not in Maine on the east coast of the USA. There is another town called Bath in Maine on the east coast of the USA. And there's also things like Paris appears in many different places around the world. And one of the things that you can do to help disambiguate those is to combine fields together to say which country it should be in or which state it should be in. So all I've done with this map was just dropping the city and the value that I want to plot. And you can see Bing only knows one Bath and one Paris. It doesn't know about the ones in the US. So what I can do is create a new column and just concatenate those two fields together. So city and a comma and then the country. So now I've got this kind of disambiguated city. And now when I use that, you can see it's plotting them in the right place. Actually, it thinks that Paris is in Texas. Sorry, not Texas. It thinks it's in Nevada or somewhere like that, because there happens to be Las Vegas, of course. Because, as we all know, there's a Paris hotel in Vegas. Turns out if you search for Paris, USA, Bing thinks the thing you're looking for is that hotel. I don't know. So I could concatenate it to be Paris, comma, Texas, comma, USA, and then it would find it in the right place. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. So that's a great way of doing it. The other way is if you've got the latitude and longitude for the points that you want to plot, just drop them into this longitude and latitude field. One of the things that we did about a month ago, maybe 2 months, we improved the way that the map control handles just having latitude and longitude. So you should have much better success with it than maybe you did a few months ago. All you need to do is, like I said, put latitude, longitude in here, add the values that you want to plot, and it will go and figure it out for you. So the last thing I want to kind of point out here is our custom visuals. How many of you have tried one of the custom visuals for Power BI? That's a really good number, great. So for those of you who don't know, we open sourced our visualization framework about 6 months or so ago and said, hey, look, it's just JavaScript. Just go use D3, create your own visuals, and you can import them and use them in Power BI Desktop and in the Power BI service. And we saw some fantastic visuals come out of this. Here's just an example of a couple of them. This was created by the guys at SQL BI, which is Marco Russo, Alberto Ferrari, Miguel, whose name I forget. There's a few guys there who created this ability to take any image, draw shapes on it, and then color the shapes based on your data. So each of these different parts in this engine has been kind of drawn around the edge, and then we're coloring it based on our data. This is another custom visual down here, this little waffle chart, where it's just kind of filling it in based on the percentage values underneath. And the great thing about all of these custom visuals and using this framework is they're interactive and they talk to each other just like any other visual in Power BI. So I can do cross-filtering and highlighting just as with anything else. So if I want to focus on the body of the engine, I click on this and it highlights just that. And it highlights just the supplier that gave us the components for the body. Or the other way around, I want to focus on this fan, and it does the same thing, right? It's highlighting just that bar, and it's highlighting just those things. The guys who built this synoptic panel, as it's called, and the waffle chart, they've never talked to each other on different sides of the planet. But because it's using this framework, everything gets passed between it, and it just integrates together. If you want to go and investigate those further, you can go to Visual. If my keyboard starts working. I don't know why it's doing it. Has it decided? Display? There we go. Visuals.powerbi.com. And this is our gallery with that Sundance chart that got shown off at the keynote. That's really, really cool. Amazing kind of visualization. Everything from that to kind of sorted tables to network charts. If you've got any Tableau fans around, go and ask them to make a network chart in Tableau. It's kind of tricky. Dead simple here. Download that visual, import it into the Power BI desktop, drop the fields in you want, and it works. Everything to box and whisker plots, or as one of my colleagues mispronounced it, a box and whiskey plot, which led to creating a little report that looked at all the different Scotch distilleries and their different flavor profiles. It was great. We had to do a lot of research to get all the data for that. To things like little stock tickers. I really like this one as well. I think it's quite fun. Up to and including an aquarium. I think Amir might have mentioned a fish tank yesterday. Any of you seen this? Try playing with this. So it plots fish for each of the values that you want to look at. And the size of the fish is driven by the size of the value, right? So higher value, bigger fish. The question is, what happens when the number goes negative? You can't plot a fish with negative size, so it kind of dies and floats to the top of the fish tank. It's very sad. But hey. So you can be really creative with these custom visuals. That's my point, right? You can kind of do anything with them. I mean, even things like these 3D maps, which I think we showed off at the keynote as well. This is really, really cool. Being able to say, I'm just going to take this WebGL code that's kind of freely available all over the internet and drop it here into one of my Power BI visuals. And I can use this in the reports, in my dashboards, absolutely anywhere. Really, really, really simple. So that's kind of everything. I think I've covered probably more than 15 tips and tricks, but hopefully that's been useful. We've got, my countdown time is on a minute, so I can take one question before we have to finish. But please feel free to come up and ask me more questions afterwards. I'll be up in the community lounge, which is, you kind of go back out to the main lobby and around the corner a little bit. It's kind of tricky to find, but follow the signs. I'll be there if you want to come and ask any other questions. But we'll take one that I can do to the live stream, if anyone's got anything. Gentleman right down the front then. Sure. OK, so the gentleman said, I've seen this globe, but I also saw some demos where it was a flat map, but with the bars, kind of a 3D flat map. So this custom visual just does it in a globe, but it would be easy enough to write it to say, plot it on a flat surface. Nobody's built it yet. It's a great idea. Take a look. Put it out on the community website. Great, thanks all very much. Great.